Why did she still hesitate, even after 8 years of doing this? The elephant grass swayed around her like waves on a forgotten sea, tall enough to swallow her whole. Each blade shimmered under the burning sun, bending and rising in rhythm with the wind. Somewhere in that endless green, Staff Sergeant Stella Rivera lay completely motionless, a living ghost, hidden in plain sight. The world moved, but she did not. Her heartbeat was the only sound she allowed herself to hear. 6 hours. That's how long she'd been there in the same position, chest pressed against the soil, rifle steady against her shoulder, every muscle locked in quiet discipline. The M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle beside her was more than a weapon. It was the one constant in a life that demanded stillness, solitude, and silence. 200 meters ahead, a four-man SEAL team advanced through a dry creek bed, their steps sure but cautious. They didn't know she was there. They weren't supposed to. That was her job, to protect them without ever being seen, to watch over the ones who went into the fire and make sure they came back out. She blinked slowly, eyes tracking their movement through the shimmering air. Lieutenant Commander Alex Brennan led them, tall, composed, voice always calm, even under fire. His team followed like clockwork. Chief Petty Officer Isaiah Grant, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Lau, and Petty Officer Second Class Carlos Mendez. 4 men who'd trained for years to move as one. They thought this mission, a reconnaissance sweep through insurgent-controlled territory in eastern Myanmar, was routine. But Stella knew better. She'd been shadowing them for 2 days, unseen, unheard, and absolutely necessary. The SEALs were part of something bigger, a layered operation that their own commanders hadn't fully explained to them. The truth was, they were bait, and Stella was the insurance policy that no one would ever acknowledge. Her earpiece crackled softly. Overwatch, this is Guardian Actual. SEAL element approaching waypoint Charlie. Confirm position. She pressed her throat mic. Her voice, low and calm, barely rose above a whisper. Guardian Actual Overwatch. I have visual on SEAL element. Distance 200 meters. Holding position in tall grass, grid November Delta 7432. All clear in my sector. Copy Overwatch. Maintain surveillance. Intel suggests enemy presence in the valley but no specifics. Keep those SEALs alive. Understood. Overwatch out. Silence returned, the kind that swallows you whole. She eased back behind her scope, the crosshair following Brennan's team as they moved between rocks and brush. They were good, clean movement, tight formation, minimal noise. But even the best soldiers could only see what was in front of them. The jungle hid too much. The grass concealed everything else. That was where she came in. 8 years ago, the army had found her, a quiet woman from Montana with a hunter's patience and a mathematician's mind. At sniper school, she had broken records no one even knew existed. Shots at 1,200 meters. Easy. At 1,500. Routine. She didn't just shoot. She solved every shot, each trigger pull a physics equation of wind, temperature, elevation, and breath. But it wasn't her aim that made her extraordinary. It was her mind. Most soldiers feared isolation. Stella thrived on it. The silence didn't break her. It steadied her. When command realized this, they gave her a new title, Guardian Sniper. Not a name that appeared on rosters, not something spoken out loud in briefings. Just a code name passed quietly through classified channels. The unseen protector, the ghost above the battlefield. She had operated in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and now Myanmar. 143 confirmed kills, none of them for glory. Every trigger she pulled was to protect someone who never even knew she was there. The sun climbed higher, heat pressing down through the thick air. Sweat slid down her temple, tracing a line through the camouflage paint on her skin. Her body didn't flinch. Pain, heat, hunger, all background noise. The only thing that mattered was sight, picture, and intent. She adjusted her rifle slightly, breathing slow and steady. Her mind drifted back for just a second to Montana, her father teaching her to shoot across canyons, the way he whispered, "You never take a shot unless you know why." She asked him once what he meant. He'd smiled. "Because pulling a trigger changes the world, kid, even if it's just by a fraction of a heartbeat." She hadn't understood then, she did now. At 10:47 hours the world shifted. Lau froze mid-step, hand raised. Brennan's team dropped low instantly, instincts honed by years of training. Stella's scope swung east. Movement on the ridgeline distant, faint, but unmistakable. She adjusted focus. Her stomach tightened. 20 enemy fighters, maybe more, moving in formation, setting up heavy machine guns and RPGs, coordinated, disciplined. Too disciplined for local militia. This wasn't chance. It was an ambush, pre-planned, calculated, lethal. The SEALs were walking straight into it. Brennan's voice came through her earpiece, steady but urgent. "All stations, this is SEAL 1. We have eyes on enemy force, approximately 20 personnel, bearing 090, distance 1500 meters, setting up for ambush. Request immediate fire support." The Tactical Operations Center answered after a heartbeat that felt like forever. SEAL 1, Guardian Actual. Closest air support 12 minutes out. Artillery unavailable due to civilian proximity. Disengage and move to alternate extraction. Brennan's voice sharpened. "Negative, we're in a bottleneck. If we move, we're exposed. If we stay, we'll be pinned." Stella already knew what she had to do. Her hand reached for the rifle. The M110 wasn't meant for 1,500-meter engagements. Its effective range was barely 1,000, but she'd pushed it further before. Every variable flashed through her mind. Wind 3 knots west, elevation difference 70 feet, humidity near 70%. She could do it. Her voice calm as ever. "Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch. I have visual on enemy force. Request permission to engage." A pause, then a different voice, Colonel Rachel Foster, cut through the static. "Overwatch, confirm position and capability. That's extreme range for that platform." Stella's reply came without hesitation. "Grid November Delta 7432. Distance 1700 meters from target. Wind 3 knots west. Temp 94. Slight downhill shot. I can make these." Another pause, then. "Overwatch, you're cleared to engage. Priority targets, heavy weapons and command elements. Keep those SEALs alive." She exhaled slowly. The kind of breath that cleared more than lungs, it cleared fear. The first target, a militant setting up a PKM machine gun. 3 breaths in, 1 slow exhale. The rifle cracked, muted by the suppressor, but still sharp in the still air. The bullet crossed the valley in 3.2 seconds. The fighter dropped instantly, like a puppet with cut strings. The SEALs didn't even look back. They didn't need to. Stella's eyes shifted. Next target, RPG gunner, aligning to fire into the creek bed. Second shot, another 3-second arc of physics and intention. The man fell backward, launcher slipping from his grasp. Radio chatter filled her ear. "SEAL 1, this is Overwatch. 2 threats down, machine gun and RPG neutralized. Working through the rest." Brennan's voice cracked with disbelief. "Overwatch, we don't even see where you're firing from. Who the hell?" She cut him off gently. "SEAL 1, that information is classified. Trust me. Stay in cover, let me work." A faint chuckle in his voice. "Copy that." Her third target was a sniper, a Dragunov operator scanning the valley. A professional, dangerous. She didn't give him a chance. The shot landed center mass. The body tumbled backward out of sight. Below, the enemy broke formation. Panic, confusion. They had no idea where death was coming from. Some fired blindly. Others dove for cover. It didn't matter. Stella's breathing stayed even. Her pulse didn't change. Every shot was a small decision between chaos and control. Wind shifted slightly. She adjusted her dope card half-moa correction. Another militant fell, then another, each bullet a whisper from the tall grass. 15 minutes later, the ridgeline went silent. 8 confirmed dead, several wounded, the rest retreating in disarray. Stella keyed her mic. Seal 1, Overwatch. Enemy force withdrawn. You're clear to move to alternate extraction. I'll maintain Overwatch during movement. Silence, then Brennan's voice quieter now. Overwatch, I've been doing this 12 years and I've never seen shooting like that. Who the hell are you? For the first time that day, she allowed herself a smile. Someone who's very good at her job, Seal 1. Now move your team before they regroup. She tracked them through her scope as they advanced, ghosts in the jungle, alive because of another ghost they'd never meet. When they were safe, she whispered to herself, "That's why you're here." But the valley wasn't done testing her. At 11, 34 hours movement again south of the SEAL's route. Another group, a dozen armed fighters trying to flank. She radioed immediately. SEAL 1, Overwatch. Additional element south, 12 personnel moving to cut off your path. Engaging now. Range, 1,800 meters. Wind variable, gusting left. Extreme distance for her rifle. She fired Miss Rockstrike high right. She adjusted. Second round impact. The lead fighter dropped. After that it became routine. Breathe, calculate, squeeze. 20 rounds later, the southern element was shattered. Brennan's voice came through again, different now. Not just professional, human. Overwatch, when we get back, I'm buying you whatever the hell you drink. That was. She interrupted softly. Appreciate that, SEAL 1, but I don't exist in your reports. You never heard me. This conversation never happened. A beat of silence, then with quiet sincerity. Understood, but whoever you are, you saved 4 lives today. Static filled the line and then silence. She stayed another 90 minutes, watching over their extraction. Helicopters finally came, blades cutting through the heat haze. She tracked them until they disappeared over the horizon. Only then did she move, crawling backward through the tall grass, vanishing the same way she'd appeared. No victory shout, no applause, just silence, the kind she understood best. And as she disappeared into the jungle, a single thought crossed her mind, soft, steady, almost a whisper. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. What happens when the person who saves everyone isn't supposed to exist? 30 hours after the valley went quiet, Stella Rivera sat in a windowless room that wasn't on any official map. The air inside the facility was cold, too clean, too filtered, like the world outside had been erased. On the metal table in front of her lay her rifle case, sealed and silent. Across from her, Colonel Rachel Foster flipped through a tablet. Beside the colonel sat a man in a charcoal suit, name tag reading Thomas Hayes, Defense Intelligence Agency. His eyes were polite but distant. Both looked like they'd slept well. Stella hadn't. Foster spoke first. Staff Sergeant Rivera, I've reviewed the drone footage from your operation. 20 confirmed enemy killed, ranges between 1,400 and 1,800 meters, all with an M110. That's shooting that. Stella finished for her, voice calm but tired. Shouldn't be possible with that weapon system. I've heard that before. The colonel allowed a faint smile, and yet it happened. Hayes leaned forward slightly. His tone was softer, curious. You've been doing this for 8 years, correct? Guardian sniper operations across multiple theaters. Yes, sir. He studied her face like she was a blueprint. 143 confirmed kills, all in defense of U.S. Special Operations teams. Every shot justified, every engagement confirmed by telemetry. Do you know how rare that is? Stella looked at him for a moment. It's my job, sir, that's all. Hayes exchanged a glance with Foster. He seemed almost disappointed by her simplicity. It's more than a job, Sergeant. Yesterday, you saved 4 SEALs from certain death. They had no idea you were even there, and they went home because of you." Stella said nothing. She never knew what to do with praise. It didn't feel earned. The colonel continued. Lieutenant Commander Brennan filed a report. He mentioned an unknown sniper providing overwatch. We scrubbed that section immediately, classified it beyond his clearance. As far as he knows, it was an experimental drone providing remote precision fire. Stella nodded. "That's good. He doesn't need to know the truth." "No," Foster agreed. "He doesn't, but we do." She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "Tell me, Rivera, after all these years, why keep doing it? You could have transferred trained recruits, taken a safer assignment." The room went silent for a few seconds. Then Stella spoke softly. "Because someone has to stay invisible." Hayes tilted his head. "Invisible. Someone has to do the work that no one's allowed to talk about. Someone has to protect the people who make headlines, the ones who get medals, not funerals." She paused, her gaze fixed on the blank wall behind them. "If I stop doing it, who takes my place?" That question hung in the air like dust. Foster folded her arms. "That's what we wanted to ask you. What would it take to make you more effective? Equipment, personnel, support?" Stella blinked, thinking it was a test. "You're asking me what I need." Hayes nodded. "You've been improvising for 8 years, older rifle platforms, self-calculated weather data, minimal field intel. Imagine what you could do with proper resources." She hesitated, then spoke with precision, as if building a checklist in her head. "Better rifle. The M110 is excellent, but it's not meant for what I do. I need something in .338 Lapua Magnum, longer range, heavier bullet, better stability at distance. Advanced weather monitoring gear so I can read conditions without guessing. And," she stopped. "And," she looked at Foster, "let me train others." That made both of them sit up straighter. "I can't be everywhere," Stella continued. "Teams deploy all over Iraq, Syria, Africa, now Myanmar. I can't cover them all. If we had more Guardian snipers, even just 5, we could save more lives." Hayes rubbed his chin. "You want to build a program?" "No, sir. I want to build a legacy. The capability shouldn't depend on me." Foster and Hayes exchanged quiet looks, the kind that meant decisions were already being weighed in rooms far above them. The colonel finally nodded. "We can authorize equipment upgrades immediately. The training program, that's more complicated. It means funding, selection criteria, oversight." "Start small," Stella said. 5 candidates, already advanced snipers. 6 months of specialized training. If it fails, you've lost nothing. If it works, you'll have multiplied yourself," Hayes finished. "Exactly." He nodded slowly. "We'll take it up the chain." The meeting ended quietly, no ceremony, no handshake. Stella picked up her rifle case and left the room as silently as she'd entered it. Outside, the corridor hummed with fluorescent light. She walked down the hall alone, boots echoing faintly on the polished concrete floor. She didn't know whether they'd approve her request. She didn't care much. What mattered was that the SEALs were alive. That night in her quarters, she sat on the edge of her bunk staring at her hands, the same hands that had ended 20 lives to save 4. The same hands that could hold a rifle steady through chaos, but trembled slightly when they weren't holding anything at all. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, a faded picture of her father standing beside a young Stella, a deer in the background, a mountain behind them both. On the back, in his handwriting, "Stillness isn't silence, it's control." She pressed the photo flat between her palms. "You were right, Dad," she whispered. 6 weeks later, she was in northern Syria, another operation, another forgotten corner of the world. This time, it was a Delta Force team raiding an ISIS safe house in the outskirts of Raqqa. Stella lay in the rubble of what had once been a hotel, her new rifle, a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum, cradled against her shoulder. Wind 4 knots, range 2,100 meters, temperature 87 degrees. She received her equipment upgrades 2 weeks prior, and it was like breathing new air. The heavier rifle kicked harder, but it sang in her hands, precise, forgiving, ruthless. The Delta team advanced below, unaware that death watched from nearly a mile and a half away. 2 enemy fighters appeared on a rooftop, moving to flank the Americans. Stella's finger brushed the trigger. 1 shot, 2 targets down. Another life-saving equation solved in silence. She smiled faintly. The Lapua round did its job beautifully. The raid ended with 0 American casualties. As the helicopters lifted out, Stella watched from the darkness. She didn't radio in, didn't say a word. Her mission wasn't to be heard, only to be certain. Months passed. By spring, she was back in the United States, in a remote facility in Virginia surrounded by pine trees and silence. 5 candidates stood before her, 3 men, 2 women, all hand-picked from the best sniper schools in the country. She looked at them with the detached focus of a sculptor examining raw marble. "You all think you know what isolation feels like," she began. "You don't." They didn't flinch. That was a good start. "For the next 6 months, I'm going to teach you how to disappear, how to become a myth." She paced slowly in front of them. "You won't get medals. You won't get mentioned in reports. Your job is to make sure others come home alive and no one ever knows why." She stopped, letting the words settle. "This isn't about killing. It's about protecting. Remember that, or this program will eat you alive." Training began the next morning. They spent days lying motionless in freezing mud, nights calculating ballistic drift in their heads, until exhaustion blurred numbers into hallucination. Stella pushed them to their limits, not to break them, but to reveal who they were when the world went quiet. One by one, cracks appeared. 1 candidate quit after 2 weeks. Another lost composure during a 12-hour concealment test. By the 4th month, only 3 remained. Those 3 learned what silence really meant. They learned to read the air like a language, to feel humidity as numbers, to treat every breath as a countdown. They learned that stillness was not the absence of movement, but the art of waiting without emotion. When graduation came, Stella said only one thing: "You're not ghosts yet, but you will be." 2 years later, one of those graduates was in Yemen. Commander Alex Brennan, the same man she'd saved in Myanmar, was leading another SEAL platoon. Mid-operation, his team came under heavy fire. No escape, no support. Then the radio crackled. "SEAL Actual, this is Overwatch. I have your position. Engaging threats at bearing 045, distance 1,600 meters." Brennan froze, remembering that voice, or what it represented. "Copy that, Overwatch," he said quietly, a smile creeping through his fear. Minutes later, the gunfire stopped. The battlefield fell silent again. This time it was Stella. It was one of her students. And Brennan knew, somewhere out there, someone was watching over them again. That night, Stella sat alone in her small office back in Virginia, reviewing mission logs from the Guardian program. Her students' reports were brief, clinical, the kind of writing soldiers used to hide emotion. But between the lines, she saw it. The same stillness, the same invisible pride. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to exhale. The mission was working. And as she turned off the light and looked out the window toward the empty training range, she felt that familiar calm settle over her again. The quiet satisfaction that came from knowing somewhere tonight, soldiers were coming home alive because of people no one would ever see. She smiled faintly, whispering into the dark, "Sometimes the best warriors are the ones who never make a sound." How do you hold on to yourself when your whole life depends on not being seen? The sound of rain against the tin roof was steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat she no longer trusted. Stella sat alone in a safe house on the outskirts of Erbil, Iraq. On the table beside her, The new Guardian rifle lay disassembled, gleaming metal resting under dim light. It had been 5 years since Myanmar. 5 years since she'd risen from the grass. 5 years since she'd been invisible and necessary. A ghost whose existence was classified, compartmentalized, and quietly multiplied. The Guardian program had grown from one sniper to six. 6 shadows scattered across the world: Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, Syria, Myanmar again, and now Iraq. Each one handpicked, trained under her watch, operating alone in silence. Stella had taught them everything she could. But she couldn't teach them how to live with the quiet that came after. The missions always started the same way. Encrypted orders, coordinates, a unit's call sign, a target zone. And one simple objective: keep them alive. No names, no faces, no recognition. Each Guardian sniper operated outside the normal rhythm of war. They didn't brief with the units they protected, didn't meet the men and women who depended on them. They were watchers, unseen sentinels whose bullets kept history from taking a darker turn. But the price of silence was loneliness. Stella leaned back in her chair and stared at the cracked wall opposite her. The paint peeled in slow curls, the color of dust in forgotten years. Outside, the muezzin's call drifted faintly across the rain, echoing through narrow streets. She'd been awake for 27 hours. Sleep never came easy after a mission. Her radio, still tuned to secure frequency, flickered with static. Then a voice, one of her students: Overwatch 4. Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch 4. Operation completed. Friendly unit exfiltrated. 0 casualties. Stella pressed her mic. Copy that 4. Confirm no compromise. Affirmative. Enemy neutralized. Distance 1780 meters. Wind 2 knots west. 2 hostiles eliminated. Good work, she said softly. The radio clicked off. Silence again. That's what she had built, an army of ghosts who didn't even know each other's names. It was effective, it was brilliant. It was also slowly hollowing her out. 2 weeks later, back at the Virginia training facility, the wind off the Atlantic carried a bitter chill. The pine trees whispered as if repeating secrets. Colonel Foster was waiting in the briefing room when Stella arrived. She looked older, tired, but still sharp as ever. Sit down, Rivera, she said, gesturing toward the chair. Ma'am. Foster folded her hands. We've been reviewing the metrics from the Guardian program. The results are impressive. 6 operators, 32 successful Overwatch missions, 0 friendly casualties. That's what we trained them for, Stella replied. Yes, but success breeds attention. Attention breeds questions. The Joint Chiefs want a briefing, not on your operators specifically, but on the concept. They want to know what comes next. Stella frowned. Next. Foster nodded. They want to expand it, formalize it. 30 operators within the next 2 years. Full integration with SOCOM command structure. Stella's silence wasn't agreement, it was calculation. Expansion meant oversight. Oversight meant exposure. Ma'am, she said carefully, the more people who know about us, the weaker the system becomes. Guardians work because no one knows they exist. I agree, Foster said, but her tone suggested the decision had already been made above her pay grade. But you know how it goes. Once something works in war, people want to replicate it, scale it. Stella looked down at her hands, calloused, precise. They'll ruin it. Foster's voice softened. Or they'll take what you built and make sure no soldier ever walks into an ambush again. Isn't that what you wanted? Stella didn't answer. She wasn't sure anymore. She built the program to save lives, not to build an empire. And somewhere deep inside, she feared what it would become once it left her control. That night, she sat alone in her quarters. A half-finished report glowed on her laptop screen, cursor blinking at the end of a paragraph she couldn't bring herself to finish. Her mind drifted back to her first mission, The tall grass, the heat, the sound of Brennan's voice crackling through static. Overwatch, who the hell are you? She had smiled that day. It felt simple then. It wasn't anymore. She'd watched too many lives through a scope, men praying before firefights, women clutching photos of their children before boarding helicopters. She'd seen courage, fear, mercy, and cruelty, all through magnified glass. The longer she watched, the more she realized. Distance doesn't just change perspective, it changes humanity. You start to forget what a heartbeat sounds like up close. By the following year, the expansion began. 15 new recruits arrived at the training compound, fresh faces, younger, eager, some too eager. They came from everywhere, Rangers, Marines, special reconnaissance units, all exceptional shooters, all thinking this program would turn them into legends. Stella broke that illusion the first day. "You're not here to become famous," she said, packing the firing line as they knelt with rifles resting on bipods. "You're here to vanish. The best guardian is the one no one remembers existed." A young Marine sniper smirked. "Ma'am, with respect, how do you build a career on being invisible?" Stella stopped in front of him. Her tone didn't rise. "You don't, you build a purpose." He didn't smile again after that. Training this new class was harder. Not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked stillness. Stillness wasn't about holding a rifle steady. It was about learning to exist without validation. Some cracked, some grew quiet, a few began to understand. By month 5, she started to see reflections of herself in their movements. The slow breathing, the precise math behind every squeeze of the trigger, the silent respect for what it meant to protect without acknowledgement. Yet every time she saw that look, that calm, detached stillness, something inside her winced. Because she knew what came next. The silence that eats away at you when the radio stops transmitting. The quiet that starts to sound like guilt. One evening, Foster visited her again. The colonel looked heavier, burdened by too many classified victories. "How's the training going?" she asked. "Efficient," Stella said flatly. "Efficient doesn't sound like proud." Stella sighed. "They're good shooters. Some are better than I was at their age, but they still think the job is about precision. It's not. It's about restraint." Foster studied her for a long moment. "You ever think about taking leave?" "I wouldn't know what to do with it." "That's not a healthy answer." "I don't live a healthy life." The colonel almost smiled at that, almost. "You've given this country more than anyone knows, Rivera. You deserve to breathe once in a while." Stella looked past her, out the window where the tree line dissolved into night. Breathing feels easier when someone else gets to live because of it. Foster nodded. There was nothing more to say. Months turned into years. The Guardian program became a classified success story. Quietly, it saved hundreds. Dozens of special operations missions concluded without casualties, because somewhere unseen, a single bullet changed the outcome. Stella's name never appeared in any report. But her fingerprints were everywhere. And yet, the more effective the program became, the more invisible she felt in her own life. She lived between operations and training cycles, hotel rooms, safe houses, bases. No family, no partner, no real address. The only constant was the rifle case that followed her everywhere, like a shadow of the person she used to be. Sometimes, when the world went silent around her, she'd imagine what it would have been like to live without a scope between herself and reality. To hold something other than a weapon. To look someone in the eyes and not measure distance. But those thoughts never stayed long. She couldn't afford them to. There was always another call sign, another team in trouble. And every time the encrypted transmission came through, she answered without hesitation. "Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch. I have visual." Because that was who she was now. A guardian. A ghost. a quiet force between life and death. Years later, the question would come up in a closed-door Pentagon session. One general, young, ambitious, asked her, "Sergeant Rivera, how do you measure success in your program? Kills, lives saved." Stella had looked at him, unblinking. "Neither," she said. "We measure silence." The general frowned. "Silence?" "Yes, sir. Every time you don't hear about a mission going bad, that's us. Every time a squad comes home without casualties, that's us. Every quiet night after a storm that never happened, that's what we measure." He hadn't known what to say to that. Because war was supposed to make noise. And she had built a profession out of keeping it quiet. That night, alone again, she sat on the porch of the Virginia compound. The training field stretched before her, empty under moonlight. The grass shimmered silver, tall, soft, familiar. A breeze passed through, bending the blades like ocean waves. For a moment, she could almost smell the heat of Myanmar again. The tall grass. The silence before the shot. She closed her eyes and smiled faintly. 8 years of war, 16 years of service, hundreds of lives saved. And still, she felt the same truth she'd known that first day in the field. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it breathes quietly, it protects, it waits. And when the world forgets who you are, maybe that's when you've done your job perfectly. How long can a person live in silence before it starts talking back? The sun was sinking behind the desert ridge when Stella Rivera realized the math didn't add up. She lay prone on a barren slope outside Hadramaut, Yemen, her scope locked on a valley below where a Marine raider platoon was setting up a forward position. They were expecting light contact, maybe a dozen insurgents. But the number of muzzle flashes she saw in the first 30 seconds told a different story. Too many, too coordinated, too late to pull back. She keyed her mic. "Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch. Visual confirmation of 40-plus hostiles engaging raider element. They're pinned near grid Foxtrot 7-9er. Request permission to engage." Static hissed. Then a clipped voice answered command somewhere hundreds of miles away. "Overwatch, air support inbound. ETA 9 minutes. Hold fire, do not compromise position." 9 minutes. She stared through her scope. The Marines were trapped behind a low wall, already taking casualties. She could see one, maybe 19 years old, trying to drag a wounded friend into cover, only to drop when a burst of gunfire ripped the air around him. 9 minutes was too long. Her breathing slowed. She felt the old stillness take over, that quiet clarity that turned chaos into geometry. "Guardian Actual," she whispered. "They won't last 9 minutes, engaging." "Overwatch, negative, hold your." But she'd already pulled the trigger. The Lapua round crossed nearly 2,000 meters, hit the gunner dead center, and sent the enemy's heavy weapon clattering off the ridge. She adjusted left, fired again, another target down. The Marines below looked up briefly, confused by death coming from somewhere invisible. Within 30 seconds, she dropped 5 hostiles, thinned the enemy line enough for the Marines to reposition. But then a new flash of movement, not below, behind. Her instincts screamed before her brain processed it. A figure on the far ridge, scoped rifle, trained directly at her. She rolled. The shot came a fraction of a second later, tearing through the dirt where her head had been. Counter-sniper. That wasn't supposed to happen. Guardians never got hunted. She crawled downslope, slow, controlled, using the terrain to mask her movement. Every shift of her elbow sent small avalanches of dust down the hill. The other sniper fired again, closer this time. The echo cracked across the desert like lightning. She paused behind a rock outcrop, heart pounding. He was good, precise, patient. Whoever he was, he'd found her through sheer calculation. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Stella wasn't the hunter. She was the target. 3 minutes of silence, then a reflection, sunlight off glass far left ridge. That was him. She inhaled, exhaled. Her hand steadied the Lapua's long barrel against the stone. Wind, left to right 2 knots. Range, 1,980 meters. He fired first, missed low. She didn't. Her round caught him just as he adjusted for another shot. Through her scope, she saw him jerk backward, tumble behind the ridge. She didn't celebrate, she didn't move. She waited. A minute passed, then 2. Nothing. Finally, she pressed her mic. Guardian actual, overwatch, counter-sniper neutralized, radar element stable, air support arriving. There was a long silence on the radio. Then, Overwatch, you violated direct order. Copy, she said simply. The rest of the transmission was administrative, cold, official. She barely heard it. Because deep down, she knew what was coming. 2 days later, she sat across from Colonel Foster again. The colonel didn't yell, she never did, but her disappointment was worse than anger. Do you know what kind of diplomatic firestorm that engagement caused? Stella's expression didn't change. Ma'am, Marines were dying, I made a call. You broke protocol, you revealed your position, you almost got killed. I got results. That's not the point, Rivera. Foster's voice cracked for the first time in years. You're not a one-woman army, you're part of a machine. When you start ignoring command structure, you compromise the whole system. Stella's reply was almost a whisper. The system wasn't bleeding on that valley floor. Foster looked away, exhaled through her nose. You've been running on fumes for years. You think you're saving people, but you're burning yourself out. And one day, you're going to take the shot that doesn't save anyone. Silence. Then Stella said quietly, permission to return to training operations, ma'am. Foster shook her head. Denied, you're on mandatory stand-down. That hit harder than any reprimand. Ma'am, with respect. With respect, Sergeant, you're human. You need to start remembering that. The colonel stood and left the room. Stella remained seated, hands on the table, staring at nothing. For the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt. Not anger. Something emptier. Disconnection. The weeks that followed were quiet, too quiet. She stayed at the Virginia compound, supervising trainees, fixing rifles, checking wind patterns for a range she wasn't allowed to shoot on. The world kept spinning without her. Her students deployed. Missions succeeded. The Guardian network hummed along perfectly without its architect. And that somehow hurt more than any wound. At night, she sat in the mess hall long after lights out, drinking black coffee that had gone cold hours before. The air hummed with the sound of generators. Outside, pine branches brushed the windows in the dark. One evening, she heard footsteps approach. It was Hayes, the DIA liaison, still immaculate in his suit, even out here in the mud. Thought I'd find you here, he said, sliding into the chair across from her. Couldn't sleep, she replied. He studied her for a moment. Neither could the colonel. You gave her quite a scare. I made the right call. Maybe, Hayes said, but right doesn't always mean authorized. You know that. She stared at the wall. You came all the way out here to lecture me. No, he said softly, to ask you something. She looked up. Why do you keep doing it, Stella? 8 years, 24 countries, 160 kills, all without recognition. You could have walked away a long time ago. Why stay? Her answer came after a long pause. Because every time I look through that scope, she said, I see someone's kid, someone's parent, someone waiting for them to come home, and I know that if I don't pull the trigger, they might never see each other again. Hayes nodded slowly. You ever think maybe you deserve someone waiting for you too? She didn't answer. He stood, sighed, and placed a file on the table. When command decides what to do with you, you'll be the first to know. In the meantime, get some sleep. That's an order from someone who doesn't have the rank to give it. He left. She opened the file. Inside was a single photo, grainy drone imagery. A new operation, new coordinates. Underneath, a handwritten note. They'll need you again soon. Be ready. 3 weeks later, the call came. Guardian Actual, this is SOCOM Command. Request immediate deployment of Overwatch 1 to classified location. Hostile movement near humanitarian corridor. Possible ambush. She didn't hesitate. Copy, wheels up in 30. She didn't even pack a bag. Just the rifle, the ghillie suit, the one photograph of her father. By sunrise, she was in northern Africa, hot wind, shifting sand. A convoy route cut through the desert. She lay hidden on a dune overlooking the path, her rifle steady, radio silent. Below, a UN medical convoy rolled through the valley, armored trucks carrying aid workers under military escort. Among them were American advisors. That was her assignment, ensure safe passage. For the first hour, everything was quiet. Then movement. Dust trails on the horizon, fast, dozens of them. She switched to infrared, picked up heat signatures, 20, 30, maybe more. Guardian Actual, she whispered. Hostile convoy approaching, bearing 012, speed 35 kilometers per hour. Overwatch confirmed. Maintain concealment, will coordinate air assets. She didn't wait for the rest. The first RPG streaked through the air before the word assets left the radio. Explosion, smoke, screams. She fired, first target down, second, third. Her shot stitched through the enemy trucks like a scalpel. Every bullet bought seconds. Every second, another life. But there were too many. A gun truck veered toward the convoy, heavy machine gun blazing. She adjusted aim, fired, missed. Wind changed, readjusted, fired again. Hit, vehicle exploded mid-turn. Through the chaos, she caught a glimpse. One of the UN doctors, a woman in white, running for cover, hand clutching another medic's arm. And then, a burst of fire cut her down. The woman fell beside the burning truck. Stella froze. Her finger hovered over the trigger, trembling, the first tremor she'd felt in years. She exhaled once, twice. Then fired again, methodical, surgical. By the time air support arrived, the attackers were either dead or scattered. But the medic was gone. When it was over, Stella sat in the sand beside her rifle. The heat shimmered like liquid around her. Her breathing was steady, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd saved 20 soldiers, 20 Americans. But she couldn't save one civilian who'd never even held a gun. The radio crackled faintly. Overwatch, excellent work, convoy secure, no further hostiles detected. She didn't answer. For the first time, she wasn't sure if it was excellent work. The desert wind howled across the dunes, carrying the faint smell of smoke and fuel. She sat there until the sun went down, until the stars came out, until her own shadow disappeared into the sand. Because in that moment, for the first time in 8 years, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like punishment. What does a ghost do when the weight of the living becomes too heavy to carry? The flight home was silent. No chatter from the pilots, no debrief in the air, just the low drone of engines and the smell of gun oil. Stella sat strapped into a jump seat, helmet in her lap, eyes fixed on the deck. Every vibration in the fuselage pressed the memory deeper, the UN medic falling, the bright flash, the dust settling over her white uniform. She told herself she had done her job. But the truth wouldn't let go. When the plane touched down at Ramstein, she walked straight to the washroom, locked the door and turned on the tap. Water ran over her hands, pink at first from sand-burned skin, then clear. She stared into the mirror. The woman staring back looked like someone she used to know, same eyes, same sharp edges, but hollow around the center. You saved 20, she told herself. You lost one. The mirror didn't answer. 2 days later, she was back in the States. Colonel Foster was waiting again. No anger this time, just a kind of exhausted empathy that comes from watching too many good soldiers wear out their souls. Foster slid a report across the table. After-action summary. Officially, 20 hostiles neutralized, convoy secure, minimal collateral damage. Command is calling it a textbook success. Stella didn't even look at it. Collateral damage has a name, ma'am. I know. She wasn't part of this fight. Foster leaned forward. Neither were you once. That landed. The colonel sighed. You want me to tell you something comforting, Rivera? I can't. We send you out there to protect lives, and sometimes life still breaks, but you can't stop doing the work because of one tragedy. One, Stella's voice was flat, almost brittle. How many ones do we stack before we stop counting? Foster studied her carefully. You need rest. I need clarity. Then start by forgiving yourself. Stella shook her head. Forgiveness doesn't change physics. It doesn't put a bullet back in the chamber. The stand-down order came that afternoon. 30 days mandatory leave. No missions, no training, no range time. She rented a cabin on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. No Wi-Fi, no radio, just rain against old wood and wind in the trees. For the first week she slept, really slept. For the second, she tried to remember how to live without a call sign. She hiked the ridges at dawn, breathing in the fog, counting her steps because counting was the only thing that still felt like control. At night she'd sit by the fire, staring into the orange light until it blurred into crosshairs. Sometimes she imagined the medic's face. She never saw it clearly that day, but her mind had filled in the blanks, kind eyes, probably early 30s, maybe a mother. Someone whose name she'd never know because classified had swallowed it. She caught herself whispering, "I'm sorry," into the flames more than once. On the 12th night, headlights carved through the trees. A black SUV, government plates. She didn't move when the knock came. Stella, a familiar voice called softly, "It's Foster." The colonel stepped in out of the rain, shook water from her coat and looked around the small cabin. "You've gone completely off-grid." That was the point. Foster sat across from her. The only light came from the fire. Hayes wanted to come. I told him not to. Stella raised an eyebrow. Why? Because he'd bring a stack of forms. I just brought a bottle. She set an unopened whiskey on the table. No glasses. Soldiers didn't need them. For a while they just sat there, listening to the fire pop. Then Foster said, "You're not the only one who's lost someone on a mission, you know." "I know. But you're the only one who keeps carrying every loss like it's the first." Stella stared into the flames. "If I stop carrying them, who will?" Foster leaned forward, voice almost a whisper. "If you keep carrying them alone, you'll collapse. And when you collapse, the people you trained lose their anchor. You want to save lives. Start with your own." That broke something inside Stella. Not enough to spill tears, just enough to make her finally breathe. They sat in silence until the bottle was half gone. Before leaving, Foster rested a hand on her shoulder. "Command wants you back next month. There's a new mission profile, not Overwatch, advisory. You'd be working with one of your graduates." "Which one?" "Overwatch 4, the one from Raqqa." Stella nodded slowly. "He's good." "Good," Foster said. "And he needs to know why we do this before he forgets." The desert waited again. Different continent, same emptiness. Operation Kestrel, Joint Task Force. Covert extraction of hostages held by a militant faction near the Sahel border. Stella's role was simple: observe, guide, mentor. No rifle, no trigger, just oversight. She hated it. From a forward command tent, she watched drone feeds flicker across screens. Overwatch 4 was positioned 2 kilometers north, scanning a canyon route. His voice came through the radio, calm, confident, too confident. Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch 4. Targets in motion. Request clearance to engage before they hit the valley. Stella pressed her mic. Negative. Wait for ground confirmation. You don't have positive ID. Ma'am, if they reach the ridge. Wait, she repeated. Seconds stretched. Then one of the drone feeds zoomed closer. 2 trucks, armed men in the back. But something in their movement felt wrong, too slow, too loose. Civilians, not militants. Probably smugglers, maybe local guards. She keyed in again. 4, stand down, those aren't hostiles. A pause, then his voice, copy, ma'am. The trucks passed, no shots fired. Later, when the extraction team moved through the same canyon, they found the real ambush site a mile east. If he'd fired, the mission would have collapsed. Stella exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. When Overwatch 4 returned to base, she met him outside the hangar. Young, sharp-eyed, reminded her too much of herself 10 years ago. You trusted your instincts, he said proudly, but if I'd taken the shot, we'd still have. You'd have killed civilians, she interrupted quietly. He looked away, understood. She softened. Listen, the hardest part of this job isn't pulling the trigger. It's not pulling it when everything in you says you should. He nodded, humbled. She watched him walk away and thought, maybe there's still hope for this program. That night, alone in the tent, she couldn't sleep. The medic's face still haunted her, but now it mixed with something new, the relief that came from not firing, the proof that restraint could save as much as precision. She opened her notebook, the one she used for ballistic logs, and wrote a single line at the bottom of a blank page. Sometimes mercy has a longer range than bullets. She stared at it for a long time, then closed the book. Weeks later, back in Virginia, Hayes showed up again, this time not with orders but with news. They're giving you a commendation, he said. For what? For saving a mission you weren't even supposed to be part of, for mentoring a successor, for proving the Guardian program works without you pulling the trigger. Stella frowned. Commendations are public. Not this one, Hayes said, almost smiling. It'll stay buried like everything else about you. She exhaled, half relieved, half sad. Good, the less people know my name, the better. Hayes hesitated. You ever think about what happens when you finally stop? She looked past him, toward the shooting range where trainees were lining up under the gray morning light. Maybe, she said, but not today. He nodded, slipped a small envelope onto her desk, for when you're ready. After he left, she opened it. Inside was a single photograph, the UN medic. Someone had identified her, Dr. Lena Vargas. Born in Madrid, 2 children. Stella closed the envelope gently and placed it in her locker beside her father's note. For the first time, the ghosts in her head had names. Later that evening, she stood on the training field as dusk fell. Her students were finishing their final exercise, a night fire range under low light. She watched through binoculars as each trainee fired at distant silhouettes, muzzle flashes blooming like fireflies. Every shot was measured, deliberate, every impact a quiet echo of the life she'd built. Foster joined her, hands in pockets. They're good, she said softly. They're better, Stella replied. You think you'll ever go back in the field? Stella lowered the binoculars. The air smelled like gunpowder and pine. Maybe one more time, she said, just to remember who I was. Foster smiled faintly, and then I teach them how to let go before they forget how. The colonel nodded, satisfied. As the last shot echoed across the valley, Stella felt something she hadn't in years, not pride exactly, but peace. A small, fragile piece of it. Because for the first time since Myanmar, she wasn't saving strangers. She was saving the ones who would take her place. The night deepened, the range lights flickered off. In the distance, a single owl called. Stella stood there alone, listening to the quiet spread through the forest, thinking about all the lives woven invisibly through hers, men and women who'd never know her name, and the ones who would carry her silence forward. She whispered almost to herself, "Every bullet I didn't fire was still a kind of protection." And as the wind swept through the tall grass that bordered the field, she smiled, because it sounded almost like applause. What happens when the invisible finally gets seen? It started as a whisper, not through radio traffic, not a leak from the Pentagon, just a rumor that moved through the special operations community like static before a storm. Someone out there was saving units that should have been wiped out. A sniper who wasn't on any manifest. A woman. At first, Stella dismissed it as coincidence. Too many missions, too many people trying to explain luck. But then the details sharpened. A near-exact description of a rifle that shouldn't exist, coordinates that matched her own deployments, even a code name that hadn't been written down anywhere, Overwatch 1. And then, one morning in early spring, she walked into the briefing room at the Virginia facility and saw her own name on a whiteboard. Not her real one. Her call sign. Foster and Hayes were waiting, both looking like they hadn't slept. Hayes gestured toward the board. "We've got a breach." Stella stared at the 4 words printed under a red header. International Media Query, Guardian Sniper Program. Her stomach dropped. How? Foster exhaled slowly. Encrypted traffic. Someone sold fragments of after-action reports to a foreign journalist. He's sitting on classified material, killed data, timestamps, even imagery. Hayes added, "We think the source is internal, someone with mid-level clearance. We're running containment, but if this hits the wire." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. If it hit the wire, the myth would die, and so would the people living inside it. That night, Stella sat alone in her office, lights off, computer screen glowing faintly. Her reflection hovered over the lines of text, operations she'd lived, coordinates she'd memorized, kill counts she'd never spoken aloud. All reduced to bullet points and numbers. This was what exposure looked like, not sunlight but fluorescence. Her throat mic, long since disconnected from field comms, sat on the desk beside her. She picked it up out of habit, thumbed the transmit button, heard nothing. For the first time in years, the silence didn't comfort her. It frightened her. 2 days later, the compound went into lockdown. Foster briefed the instructors at dawn. Until further notice, no one leaves the perimeter. External comms are disabled. We're running full internal audit. Stella stood at the back, arms folded, expression unreadable. When the room cleared, Foster approached her quietly. "I know what you're thinking," the colonel said. "Do you? You're thinking this is the end." Stella didn't answer. Foster continued, "We've kept ghosts alive for almost a decade. We can keep you hidden again. We just have to find the leak before." Before she could finish, Hayes burst through the door, tablet in hand. His voice was clipped, urgent. "It's too late." The journalist published an excerpt, not names but enough. Mentions a female sniper embedded with special operations units under a classified Guardian mandate. It's spreading. Foster's jaw tightened. "Damage control." "Already spinning it as fiction," Hayes said, "but chatter's rising. The insurgent networks are listening too. Somebody's putting bounties on a ghost they don't even believe exists." He turned to Stella. "They have your silhouette from drone footage. That's all, but it's enough." That night she sat in the dark barracks, cleaning her rifle even though she wasn't deploying. The rhythm steadied her. Bolt out, chamber check, cloth down the barrel, reassemble. The familiar metallic clicks were the only sound she trusted anymore. When the door opened, she didn't look up. Hayes stepped inside, holding a folder. "They're relocating you," he said. "Underground facility until this passes." "I'm not hiding." "You don't have a choice. You're the program's foundation if they find you. They won't. He stared at her, exasperated. Stella, listen to me. You built this thing to protect others. Let us protect you for once. She kept polishing the rifle. The moment I vanish, they'll start hunting the wrong people. My operators, my students. If someone's coming, they'll come for me. Let them. Hayes stepped closer. That's not heroism, that's guilt. Her hands stopped moving. She looked up at him, calm but deadly serious. You're right, it is, but guilt keeps me precise. He didn't argue after that. 3 nights later, she proved herself right. The perimeter alarm tripped at 02:17. Not a drill, motion sensors on the north tree line, followed by the distant pop of suppressed gunfire. By the time the base security lights flared, Stella was already moving. Rifle in hand, night vision clipped to her headset, heartbeat steady. Outside, the rain fell hard, cold, hammering the ground. 2 shadows slipped through the fence line. Not amateurs, professional, synchronized. They bypassed cameras, moved like men who'd studied blueprints. She took position on the catwalk above the motor pool, sighted through darkness. The first intruder crossed into the open. She fired once, center chest, before he even saw her. The second ducked, returned fire, rounds sparking off steel. She moved fast, silent, closed distance. He tried to flank. She waited for the angle, saw the faint glint of his scope, and squeezed. The body dropped. Only then did the alarm sirens begin to wail. By the time base security arrived, both intruders were down, faces masked, no identification. Foster appeared minutes later, coat over pajamas, eyes wide. What the hell happened? Stella handed her the spent magazine. Somebody found your ghost. Interrogations followed, forensics, the usual classified storm. But no fingerprints matched any known agency. Whoever sent them wasn't state level, or was too smart to leave proof. Hayes called it a warning. Foster called it inevitable. Stella just called it loud. Because for years she'd lived in the silence between wars, and now the world had started to hear her heartbeat. 2 weeks later, command summoned her to D.C. The secure conference room was buried 4 stories underground, cold enough to see your breath. Around the table sat officers, analysts, men in suits whose names changed with administrations. The meeting wasn't a debrief. It was a trial without a verdict. A general spoke first. Sergeant Rivera, you've served this country with distinction, but the Guardian program's existence has become a liability. We're considering full termination of operations. Stella folded her hands. Termination means pulling Overwatch from active combat zones. You'll lose coverage across 6 theaters. That's preferable to a political scandal. Preferable to soldiers dying. Another official leaned forward. You can't shoot your way out of perception. Sometimes secrecy costs more than transparency. Stella's voice hardened. You think secrecy costs? Try explaining to a family that their son, alive because someone you erased from history pulled the trigger at the right second. Transparency doesn't win wars. Shadows do. The room went silent. Finally, Foster spoke, measured, firm. Gentlemen, if we shut this down now, every unit relying on unseen Overwatch loses that protection overnight. I advise containment, not destruction. After a long pause, the general sighed. Containment, then. Reduce scope. No new trainees. Existing operators finish current rotations, then reassess. Meeting adjourned. As chairs scraped back, Hayes touched Stella's shoulder lightly. It's a compromise. She looked at him. Compromise looks a lot like surrender. Back in Virginia, the compound felt different. Security doubled, cameras everywhere. The trainees walked quieter, like people who discovered their ghosts were real. Stella spent long nights in the range bunker alone, firing at silhouettes until the air filled with the smell of cordite. Each impact echoed her frustration. Controlled, precise, useless. One night, Foster joined her again. "They're right about one thing," the colonel said. "The world's changing, eyes everywhere. Satellites, drones, AI target systems. Ghosts don't last forever." Stella lowered the rifle. "Maybe not, but until machines can feel fear, they'll still need someone who does." Foster smiled sadly. "You always did have the last word." A month later, the leak's source was finally uncovered. An analyst at an allied intel branch, selling files to fund his escape from debt. Before they could extradite him, he vanished across a border that didn't officially exist. The story resurfaced briefly online, a nameless article, unverified. Then it faded under louder news. The Guardian program survived, smaller, quieter, more secret than before. But something inside Stella didn't go back to sleep. She'd seen the perimeter breach, the boardroom debate, the fear in her students' eyes. She knew the silence could break again at any moment. So she started preparing. Not for another war. For succession. She rewrote the training manuals, encrypting philosophy between ballistics tables. Trust math, but trust mercy more. Stillness is stronger than speed. Every shot changes something, even if no one sees it. She trained a final class of 5, drilling them until their breathing matched the wind itself. And when graduation came, she told them the same words her father once told her. "Pull the trigger only when you know why." Months later, alone in her quarters, she watched the dawn creep through the window. Outside, fog rolled over the fields like the grasslands of Myanmar. She thought about the journalist, the breach, the men who came for her. And she realized that visibility wasn't her enemy, vanity was. Being seen didn't matter. Being known did. And she'd built something that no exposure could erase. Because even if her name disappeared, the idea would remain, silent guardians watching from the edges of war, keeping the noise of the world at bay. She packed a small duffel bag, placed the old M110 inside, and closed the latch with a click that sounded like an ending. Her leave papers were already signed. Not exile, not punishment. Just departure. As she stepped outside, the wind moved through the tall grass beside the range, whispering the same rhythm it always had. And she whispered back, almost smiling, "You can't kill what never wanted to be famous." How do you disappear twice? 6 months after she signed her leave papers, Stella Rivera was no one. She lived under an alias outside Bozeman, Montana, in a cabin that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Mornings were simple: coffee, wood smoke, the quiet hiss of wind pushing through pine. Sometimes she still cleaned her rifle, but mostly she let it rest in its case, like a promise she hoped never to keep. The silence was different here, not the tactical stillness of a battlefield, but something older, slower. She was learning to breathe again, to hear her own heartbeat without translating it into windage. Then one morning, her satellite phone rang. She stared at it for a long time before answering. Only one network knew that number. Rivera. The voice on the other end was ragged, frantic. "Guardian Actual, this is Overwatch 4. We've been compromised." Her pulse spiked. "Where?" "Eastern Europe. Training rotation. Someone hit the safe house. 2 operators down, 1 missing." The static on the line made his breathing sound like thunder. Then another voice cut in, "Colonel Foster." "Stella, it's real. Somebody found the Guardian network. They're hunting your people." Stella closed her eyes. For years she'd kept everyone alive by staying invisible, and now invisibility had turned into isolation. "Send me the coordinates," she said. "Stella, you're not cleared." "Send them." Foster hesitated. "You're off the books. If you go, there's no extraction." "I know." When the call ended, the silence in the cabin felt heavier than any jungle heat she'd ever known. She opened the gun case. The M110 lay there, old, scarred, beautiful. Next to it, the .338 Lapua. She took both. 48 hours later, she was standing on the cracked tarmac of a private airfield in Poland, wearing civilian clothes that did nothing to hide the soldier underneath. A contact from Foster's network met her with a single duffel bag, ammo, maps, unregistered comms. No one said her name. By nightfall, she was across the border, moving through a forest that smelled of wet soil and rust. The safe house was gone, burned out. Bodies in the yard, 3 men, 1 woman, her students. She knelt beside them in the cold mud, fingers brushing dog tags she'd personally issued. They had died the way she had trained them to live, quietly, precisely, protecting someone else. But one was missing. Overwatch 4. The one she'd mentored in the desert. She checked footprints, drag marks, blood trails. Whoever had taken him was disciplined, ex-military, maybe mercenaries. East Bloc rifles, Western tactics. Someone had paid professionals to erase the guardians. She took a breath, centered herself. The grief could wait, math first, mercy later. 2 days of tracking led her to an abandoned industrial park near the border. Dozens of heat signatures inside, guards patrolling rooftops. Too many for a single operator, unless the operator was her. She waited until dusk. The wind picked up, masking her movement. She slipped through shadows, a ghost revisiting her own mythology. Through a cracked window she saw him, Overwatch 4, bound to a chair, bruised but breathing. A man in a leather coat paced in front of him, speaking accented English. "Tell me how many there are," the man demanded. "Tell me where they hide." 4's voice was steady. "We don't hide, we just wait." The man struck him hard. Stella exhaled. The sound of his defiance was enough. She set up the Lapua on a rusted beam, adjusted for distance and angle. Wind 1 knot, range 900 meters, target the interrogator. The rifle kicked, the man dropped mid-sentence. Before the echo faded, she was already moving. She hit the ground floor entrance within a minute, suppressed pistol clearing hallways, her footsteps blending with the hum of broken machinery. Guards reacted late. The myth they'd been hunting was suddenly real and far too close. 3 shots, 2 men down, 1 wounded. By the time she reached the main room, Overwatch 4 was trying to stand, ropes half cut. He blinked at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Ma'am, can you walk?" He nodded, shaky but upright. "Then move." They slipped through a side door down a maintenance corridor. The gunfire behind them built into a storm. Stella fired methodically, cover fire, controlled bursts, every shot calculated to buy a second of silence. They reached the tree line as sirens wailed. A distant explosion lit the night orange. The facility was burning. They didn't stop moving until the horizon turned gray with dawn. At a remote farmhouse safe house hours later, he finally spoke. "I thought you were done with this," Overwatch 4 said quietly. "So did I." He studied her face, the calm that never cracked, the eyes that had seen too much. "They knew our call signs, ma'am. They knew the rotation schedules. Somebody inside sold us." "I figured. Why would they come after us? We're ghosts." Stella leaned back against the wall. "Because ghosts scare people, especially the ones who need them." He frowned. "What happens now?" She didn't answer, not right away. Finally, she said, "Now we finish what they started, and then we disappear again for real this time." For the next 3 weeks, they moved through Europe like smoke. No cell phones, no digital trail, just paper maps and memory. One by one, Stella traced the leads: bank transfers, arms brokers, a shell company registered in Malta that funneled money through 5 nations before disappearing into a defense contractor's black budget. The name behind it stopped her cold. Thomas Hayes. Not a rogue agent, not a spy, a survivor. He'd gone off the grid months earlier, listed as retired. Now he was funding private operations using what he'd learned from the Guardian program, selling the idea of invisible shooters to the highest bidder. He wasn't just leaking secrets, he was replicating them. Overwatch 4 read the file over her shoulder. What do we do? Stella's voice was calm, almost gentle. We shut him down. They found him in Vienna, hiding behind a diplomatic cover story. She watched from across the street as he exited a hotel, flanked by 2 bodyguards. Different haircut, same arrogance. For a moment she didn't move. Part of her wanted to walk away, to let the system eat itself. But then she remembered the bodies in the mud, the medic in the desert, the program she'd built on silence. She followed. Inside an underground parking garage, the echo of footsteps mixed with the hum of engines. When the bodyguards split to check the exit, she stepped out of the shadows. "Hello, Tom." He froze. His hand went halfway to his jacket before she raised the pistol. "Don't," she said quietly. "You trained me better than that." He lowered his hand slowly. "Stella, you look alive." "Can't say the same for the people you sold out." He tried to smile. "It's just business. You built something valuable. I made sure it pays for itself. You turned Guardians into guns for hire." He shrugged. "Same skill set, better salary, and no one cares about morality when they're the buyer." For the first time, anger broke through her calm. "You sold belief, not bullets. Belief that someone out there was watching the right people at the right time." He stepped closer. "You think you own that belief. You think you can bury it forever." Her eyes stayed on him. "No, but I can end the part that bleeds." He reached for his pocket fast. She didn't hesitate. One shot, center mass. He fell back against a concrete pillar, shock more than pain in his eyes. "You never miss," he whispered. "I did once," she said. "I'm not repeating it." She walked away before he hit the ground. By the time the police found the scene, she and Overwatch 4 were gone, back over the border, vanishing into the geography of myth. Foster called her the next day through encrypted line. "Tell me I don't have to clean up another international incident," the colonel said, though her tone wasn't anger, it was relief. "It's handled," Stella said. "Haze won't leak again." Foster exhaled. "You realize what this means? The program's finished, officially, permanently." "I know. What about you?" There was a long pause. "I'm finished too." "Stella." She cut the line. That night she and Overwatch 4 reached the edge of the Carpathian Mountains. Snow drifted over the road like ash. They built a small fire under the pines. He looked at her across the flames. "If the program's gone, what happens to us?" She smiled faintly. "We stop being ghosts, we become stories." He nodded, not understanding but accepting. When he finally fell asleep, she watched the fire burn low, thinking of all the things that had brought her here. The grasslands, the desert, the classroom, the silence that used to feel like safety. Now it just felt like distance. She whispered into the wind. "You can't live your whole life unseen. Sooner or later the light finds you." Then she stood, brushed snow from her coat, and looked east, toward the horizon where morning waited. Tomorrow she would walk out of the war for good. But tonight the Guardian still kept watch. How do you walk away from something that still needs you? The snow had melted by the time Stella reached the Black Sea. She walked for days not to escape, but to let the noise inside her burn itself out in silence. The horizon was gray and endless. The sea looked like brushed steel. Waves rolled slow and heavy against a forgotten pier where she sat, boots hanging over the edge, rifle case beside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't being watched. No satellites, no command channels, no call signs whispering through her earpiece. Just wind and water. She had ended it all, the program, the network, the myth. But as the tide pushed against the shore, she felt something else rising too. Not regret. Not pride. Something quieter. Recognition. She'd spent her whole life being the scope behind the story, the invisible constant that kept other people alive. And maybe that was what she was meant to be. A single shot no one ever heard, holding the world together for one more second. But the war was never supposed to become her home. At dawn, she walked through a small coastal town where no one knew her name. Fishermen mended nets. A child chased a dog through puddles. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Normal life. She found an old cafe that opened before sunrise. The owner, a woman with silver hair and cigarette eyes, poured her coffee without a word. Stella thanked her in quiet Russian. "You're not from here," the woman said. "No," Stella answered, "just passing through." The woman nodded, like she'd heard that 1,000 times. People who pass through are always the ones running from ghosts. Stella smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm running toward them." The woman studied her a moment longer, then said softly, "If you find what you're running to, make sure it wants you back." It was such an ordinary line, but it felt heavier than any order she'd ever received. That evening, she found a small church on a hill overlooking the sea. Inside, the walls were cracked, candles flickering weakly against the draft. She sat in the back pew, her rifle case resting beside her boots. The priest didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He just nodded in quiet acknowledgement like he'd seen her kind before, the kind that came not to pray, but to remember. She stared at the altar, empty except for a single burning candle. It reminded her of muzzle flash, of light born from violence. Her mind drifted back: Myanmar, Raqqa, the convoy, the medic, the grasslands whispering around her rifle barrel. All those years, she'd measured life by distance. Meters, wind speed, drop compensation. But what she never learned to measure was meaning. That candle flickered again and she realized every bullet she ever fired was a choice. And every choice, no matter how precise, left something unseen behind it. She whispered into the quiet, "For the ones I couldn't save, I hope the silence held them." Then she stood, slung the rifle case over her shoulder, and walked back into the dusk. Weeks passed. She drifted across borders like a rumor: Ukraine, then Romania, then Turkey. No missions, no objectives, just a quiet trail of unspoken goodbyes. In one border town, she helped a group of refugees repair a broken truck engine. In another, she taught a teenage girl how to steady her breathing before taking a shot, not with a gun, but with a camera. The girl smiled after the photo clicked. "Why do you breathe like that?" she asked. Stella smiled back, "Because stillness shows you what's worth aiming at." But peace, she learned, was not a permanent state. It was a rhythm, a cycle. And it was about to break again. One night, while staying in a safe house near the Georgian border, she received a message, old encryption, Guardian code. The signal was faint, almost accidental, like a voice calling out through static. "If anyone hears this, they're back." She froze. The line was ancient, but the tone was clear, one of her trainees' voice trembling. Coordinates followed, transmitted once, then silence. Stella stared at the numbers. A valley north of Tbilisi. Too close to ignore. She closed her eyes. It would never end, would it? As long as there were wars, ghosts would be needed. She packed the rifle. By midnight, she reached the ridge overlooking the coordinates. Through the scope, faint movement, a convoy of armored trucks unmarked. In the distance, figures huddled near a campfire, captured soldiers, maybe civilians. And among them, a young woman, short hair, trembling hands. Overwatch 6. The last guardian she had trained. Stella's breath slowed. She promised herself never again. But promises were luxuries, and luxuries were for those who hadn't seen what she had. She set up the bipod, checked elevation. The moonlight caught the scope, just enough to remind her of something her father once said. The world won't remember the shot that saves it, only the one that ends it. She smiled sadly, then let's make them remember nothing. Her finger rested on the trigger. Target convoy leader. Wind calm. Distance 1,540 meters. She squeezed. The man fell without sound. Panic rippled through the camp. The prisoners ducked, chaos spreading like wildfire. 2 more shots, precise, surgical, cut through the confusion. Engines sputtered, radios crackled. And in that window of fear, Overwatch 6 broke free, grabbing another captive by the arm, pulling him toward the tree line. Stella tracked her through the scope, covering, guiding, every heartbeat timed to movement. When they were finally clear, Stella packed up, calm as ritual. As she slipped through the tall grass, she felt a strange peace, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. By dawn, she reached a quiet ridge overlooking the valley. Overwatch 6 was waiting, shivering in the cold. "Ma'am," the girl stammered, "I thought you were." "Gone," Stella said softly. "I was." The young woman's eyes filled. They said the Guardians were dead. Stella glanced at the horizon, pale gold spilling over the mountains. Maybe they are, but someone had to finish the story. She reached into her pack, pulled out her dog tags, and handed them to the girl. "What are these?" "Prove that silence works." The girl hesitated. "What do I do now?" Stella smiled, that rare, almost maternal softness that cracked the iron around her voice. "Now you do what I couldn't, you live." The girl blinked back, tears. "And you?" Stella looked down at the valley. "I'll walk until I find somewhere the wind doesn't sound like gunfire." When she left, the world didn't notice. No headlines, no photographs, no medals. But rumors spread. A sniper on the ridge. A woman who never missed. A whisper that came before rescue. Over time, her legend blurred into something softer. Not a soldier, not a killer, but a guardian who appeared only when the hopeless needed her most. And somewhere, deep in the archive of a forgotten base, Colonel Foster kept a sealed envelope labeled simply, RIVERA, S, Final Transmission. Inside was a single sentence, written in Stella's careful hand. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Years later, a photograph began circulating online. No name, no caption. It showed a woman sitting by the sea at sunrise, hair caught in the wind, rifle leaning against a weathered post. Most people scrolled past it. A few stopped, stared, and whispered the same question. Was that her? No one ever answered. But somewhere in the world, whenever a soldier whispered a silent prayer before dawn, the wind carried an echo, faint, rhythmic, like a steady breath before a shot. The sound of someone still watching, still guarding, still human. And that was how the ghost of the Guardian became something greater than war. A story told in silence, a promise written in steel, and a legacy that outlived her name. Because heroes shout, legends fade, but guardians, they whisper. And sometimes that whisper saves the world.